guys know, I come out of a formal political science background. What you may not know is that I have nothing but contempt for this entire generation of people who are in formal political science. And you hear them on the news sometimes. I just heard a podcast interviewing a guy who published a book, and he's one of these formal political scientists who now works in a think tank in Washington, D.C., where he advocates for a brighter future for America, for political reform. And like you think that would be interesting to me, right? Wow, reforming the political institutions to have a better, more democratic future in America. And you know why it's not interesting? Because there are no new ideas. Like the paucity, the lack of new ideas in politics during my lifetime, and I would say especially in the last 20 years, I can say the silence is deafening. So I've got Melissa on the phone here. And the one thing I wanted to say, and we'll see if Melissa has anything to say back. And you know what? Again, when you're talking about a lack of ideas, maybe Melissa is not going to have a lot to say. Maybe you in the audience are not going to have a lot to say. And we'll just sit here in silence for 30 seconds and then end the video. I don't mind. Like, you can talk about ideas. Talking about a lack of ideas, harder to do. I understand. Okay? My fundamental observation or problem is this. The distinction between left and right has become a referendum on the generosity of the state, on how generous government should be, with really no meaningful discussion even about what to do with that money, with that generosity, with those programs. So you guys have already heard me say this. Bernie Sanders looks at the prison system and just says we should have the same system, but be more generous. And the conservatives, I mean, I'm going to stereotype here because we're not talking about any one conservative leader. They look at the prison system and they want it to stay the same, but they want to save money. They want to spend less money, maybe privatize more, maybe have more free market mechanisms. They want to save taxpayers' money. But on both sides, there are no new ideas, and there really isn't even like an empty space for questioning. Wait, maybe we should have a fundamentally new approach to prisons. And you've heard me say this about universities. Bernie Sanders looks at the university system and says, we'll keep it the way it is, but we'll be more generous. And this is fundamentally conservative. It's conservative but generous. And meanwhile, the actual conservatives or the right-wingers, they look at the same system, and again, there are no new ideas. Maybe they want to keep it exactly the same, just traditionalism, or they want to save money, one or the other. But there are no new ideas. Again, when I go across the board through every sector of life, through every area of government policy, you could even include something like religion in this. You know, what is the role of religion in our society? I think that this kind of budgetary approach to what government is, where the difference between left and right just becomes a referendum on generosity. It's not merely a lack of new ideas, but a lack of even pausing to question, wait, what if what we do in the future with our universities, what if what we do in the future with our prisons is fundamentally different from what we've done in the past? What if it's fundamentally different from what we're doing now? What if the solution isn't something we already all know and understand? What if it isn't as simple as imitating what England or Denmark or Japan are already doing? What if we actually have to think of something new or try something new? That seems to have dropped out of the kind of procedure of thinking about politics. And I can say honestly, you know, in my lifetime, I'm now 41 years old. Okay, Melissa, again, look, I'm sorry. If you got nothing to say, fine. If you got everything to say, fine. If you want to disagree with me, by all means, go ahead. But that's something that's kind of been weighing me down the last few weeks and months, especially.
You said that the difference between the left and the right basically is the difference of how generous the government is. Yeah. The other week, I listened to the State of the Union address from Donald Trump, and all of the Republicans in the audience applauded and cheered when he said that 10 million people have been taken off of food stamps.
Right.
So that's a pretty
and not because they're rich. They've been taken off of food stamps, and not because they're so wealthy they don't need food stamps anymore. He didn't say that. Anyway, go on, yeah.
He didn't say that. It's a pretty good representation of how the Republicans generally seem to view helping the poor.
Right.
Helping the poor is to get them jobs, to get them employed. So you have read Bernie Sanders' book, but I didn't actually read his book. I probably agree with you that it seems that Bernie Sanders' idea is to just become more generous and to, direct more money towards all these programs. That, of course, gets people asking, where is money going to come from? And of course, most of the time it's, take it from the wealthy, take it from Wall Street. And, it really does pit the wealthy against the poor.
Right. Right. And so also does AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I just mentioned because Bernie Sanders is a very old man. Alexandria is young, but it actually is the same problem. Like, I don't think her policies are any different from Bernie Sanders in this respect.
Yeah. Right. So someone being wealthy doesn't, by default, make them evil.
Okay, so I'm going to jump in.
But So
I'm going to take advantage of this momentary silence in your thoughts. Look, I'm going to give two examples that are totally profoundly different, but totally profoundly prove the same point. Okay? Racism. No, I'm forgetting the other one. I had two examples. All right, so we'll talk about racism for just a moment. But the other one will come to me.
Yeah.
The United States of America, and I don't really even mean this in a provocative way. It was built for a kind of openly racist purpose, and the first and most profound form of racism wasn't even slavery, but it was genocide. It was the enslavement and extinction of the native peoples and taking their land. So there was an openly racist purpose that the United States of America existed for. Right? I remember the second one now. They're totally different. Okay. Why would the future of the United States of America and its form of government, its system of democracy, or any element, why would any of our institutions in the future preserve the traditions of the past just in this one respect? If you just think of the challenge presented by racism and the transition to a society that is, if not post-racist, at least it doesn't actively believe in and pursue this kind of genocide and enslavement, right? I mean, the point is, things are not perfect now, but I heard a great anecdote the other day about one of the more sanguine leaders in the U.S. Civil War. And he was a military commander in the American Civil War, and he literally published his own magazine that was called The White Man. And in this magazine, he actively promoted the idea that what America was all about and what it needed to prioritize was murdering the native people and enslaving the blacks. And, there was a civil war. He got to prove that he didn't just believe these things on paper, okay? So, when you ask, when I ask a simple question with, what is a university and what is the function and the shape of these things in society, I am not pandering to a woke left-wing audience when I say this. Why would the institutions of the future resemble the traditions of the past? And the second example, sorry I didn't say this up front, is just technology, right? And there's a sense in which we want to pretend technology is shallow. Like Instagram isn't that different from a camera, and it is, Okay, but given just these two factors, totally transformative power of technology, totally transformative change in attitudes towards ethnicity and slavery and religion and the rights of the individual and so on. Okay, so why does a university look the way it does anymore? Why is a university built around a cathedral and a statue of a white man on a horse who was himself a slave owner and participated in that genocide, and the whole function of the university, and wasting tens of thousands of dollars, and a football stadium, and so on and so forth? There's this obvious sense in which the university could resemble Instagram. Obviously, I'm taking it a bit far. The university could resemble YouTube. And I'm not someone who's saying we need to demolish all the classrooms. I'm not. I've made my thoughts on this clear. But even if you're just raising it in this broadest sense, Okay, well, technology has transformative powers, and the abandonment of the old racist raison d'etre for the nation state as a whole has this sort of transformative effect. Shouldn't we be asking fundamentally new questions about politics and coming up with and at least trying new ideas for institutions? Innovation is completely alien to both the concept of generosity and the concept of saving taxpayers' dollars. Like the left-wing approach, presumes we already know the solution. We already know the answers. We had Bernie Sanders today saying he's just going to dump more money on Howard University and the historically black colleges. What a joke. His vision of the future of education is to preserve racial segregation, this leftover aspect of the history of racial segregation. Those colleges were created because black people were not allowed into white colleges. And when they were let in, they were treated really badly. So you just want to dump more money on what everyone actually admits, if you read about it, is a really poorly functioning and really bad value for money for these students. It's a ripoff, the historically black colleges, by the way. It's another interesting story. So both are conservative.
Can I interrupt you?
Well, sure. Yeah. One side wants to just preserve tradition with more money, and one wants to preserve the tradition at a lower cost. And they're both wrong because they both exclude innovation. Thanks, babe. Go.
You've mentioned that Bernie Sanders, part of his Medicare for All plan is to lower the wages for nurses and doctors.
He doesn't admit that. So I've raised that issue provocatively. But yes, go on.
Yeah, I think part of restructuring the education system is admitting that we're going to have to pay professors less money.
Yes.
And if you look at the university that I went to, University of Michigan, you can see the wages of all the professors. It's publicly available. And it is rather impressive how much the professors earn. That isn't taking into account the people who are adjunct professors. Of course,
yes.
They're not, earning full-time wages. A lot of people are part-time in the education system now, in the university education system. So I was just kind of thinking, of the different universities that you've been to universities around the world. You've been to universities, I think, in Cambodia, and
right.
You've been to universities in England.
Even you have experienced this in China. You will remember most of the university professors also owned restaurants or other small businesses because they don't make them.
Right. Yeah, you already guessed the point
sorry.
that I was getting to.
Right. Yeah.
You
right?
made the leap already, but what I was going to say is, for you, the wages that you were earning were actually like maybe 1,000 kwai more than other professors who had been there for years.
That's right. I was one of the most highly paid professors, if not the most highly paid at that university. I was one of them. Yeah.
Right, but that was, there were many factors for us leaving China, but that was one of the factors, is that for you it wasn't enough to justify the cost of, traveling internationally to see your daughter twice a year.
Right.
Like it just wasn't enough compared to like a Western standard of money. Yep. It's a good standard of living in China. What you were earning was good, but many of the professors had side gigs. The boss that I had was a professor at the university. She also had an English school that she did on the side.
Okay, so look, babe,
she taught kids English. I just say, part of maybe restructuring education is realizing that, well, even though you paid hundreds of thousands, maybe not hundreds of thousands, but tens of thousands of dollars to get your PhD, you weren't going to be earning that much money. Right. And also the presidents at the universities aren't going to be earning that much
insane.
Money. They earn, a ridiculous.
University presidents earning, insane, right? Okay. So,
right, babe, I have a bone to pick with that because I went to this university where the heads of the university were earning so much money, and like so much was being devoted to football, and you've mentioned this recently in other videos. So yes, I think fundamentally I agree with you that there needs to be restructuring, there needs to be reimagination of what university is.
Okay, so look, babe, completely agree with you, but I think it's really good you raised this because it's a segue to the other issue I had on my mind just when I was walking home before I turned on the camera here, and that is that I don't think anyone on the left or the right is actually interested in reducing inequality. All right. Now, again, What about innovation? What about new ideas? In today's dollars, I had someone ask me about this recently, partly because of the specter of both Donald Trump and Mike Bloomberg. These are people with billions of dollars. In Bloomberg's case, really try to look at a quantitative estimate of how much money he's got. It's unbelievable. And people have sometimes asked me, do I think billionaires should exist? Okay, well, I'm more radical and more extreme than anyone on the left if you ask me what I think. All right, I don't think anyone should earn more than $200,000 a year. All right, and
wow,
the other context this came up in, you guys might not remember, I had a kind of frenemy here on YouTube I used to do videos with called Mod Vegan. And she was one of these people like Andrew Yang. See, that's funny. I'm recording this now in 2020. Everyone knows who Andrew Yang is. Do you think anyone will remember the name Andrew Yang in the year 2025? I don't know. But Mod Vegan, like Andrew Yang, she scaremongered about robots a little bit. And I've always said this. I remember saying this to my own mother recently. No. The fundamental engine of social inequality is the apartment building, or is the condominium tower. And that's why Donald Trump never ran out of money, even though he kept going bankrupt, because his father owns apartment buildings. There is no way...
You have a point.
There is no way a robot assembly line competes with the unbelievable financial impact of having society divided into two classes of men. There are those who pay rent, and there are those who get rich collecting the rent. And it doesn't matter. The people who pay rent, even if they are wealthy, even if they're comfortable, if you have an apartment building and every single resident is a dentist earning a good living, still the landlord collecting the rent is becoming fantastically wealthy, and soon enough he has enough money to buy another apartment building and another and another. Okay? This one factor alone, which by the way is recognized in Aristotle and not by Karl Marx. Karl Marx, it's amazing. I mean, stupid guy in a lot of obvious ways. But this was not dealt with by Marx, but it was dealt with by Aristotle already. Okay? This leads to a fundamental problem that has more than one possible solution. And you know what? If you have a maximum wage, which yes, I agree with you, I think it should be ruthlessly enforced on medical doctors, ruthlessly enforced on university professors and university presidents, okay? When you have a maximum income, a maximum wage, it changes human behavior in many ways. If you're a professor and you can't earn more than $100,000 or $200,000, whatever the maximum is going to be, you are going to direct your time and energy into things other than money, into things other than milking the system for as much as it can, because that's all you can milk. So maybe that's going to go into caring about your students more, or writing books more, or maybe you're going to run a vegan restaurant in your spare time. I don't know. You're going to find other things to put your passions into when you have a maximum. Maybe you're going to take up painting or spend more time with your children. You're going to do something else. If you as a landlord have a maximum income and a maximum value of the land you can own and so on, if you can only own one apartment building, let's just say that's the limit, you are going to put more care and energy into doing the best you can with that one apartment building, as opposed to building a huge empire of apartment buildings, all right? So without going into more examples, my point is that having a maximum wage, having maximum limits on land ownership, property ownership, this isn't just good for the poor. And I don't even believe in it being good for the abstract concept of equality. It's actually good for the rich themselves. It's actually good for the millionaires. It's good for the billionaires not to exist, and I think it actually leads to a much more meaningful life. Just to fill it in with a surgeon, as opposed to a surgeon trying to earn as much money as possible, let's say doing plastic surgery. It's like, okay, well, look, this is the maximum amount you can earn. So now you can reevaluate your priorities. Like maybe each year, once you hit that maximum, doing a certain number of nose jobs and boob jobs, maybe now you start to care for the poor. Maybe now you say, okay, I'm going to go on vacation to Ethiopia and maybe do some medical practice in Ethiopia because I've already done my boob jobs for the year. For real. We're talking about the rich leading more meaningful lives. We're not just talking about helping the poor. Go on.
Yes, look, I'm like you, so it's hard for me to disagree. It might be more interesting for you to have a podcast like this with somebody who disagrees with you.
Well,
Maybe
you and I have never talked about
maybe
this.
talk to my dad, somebody who's real motivated by money. Like
Yeah.
that.
You and I have, but for the record, she's never talked to me about this before. It's interesting we agree, but I say this stuff. She could describe. We haven't. We have a lot in common. But go on.
I'm not motivated by money, but I recognize that a huge percent of the population is motivated by earning money.
Right.
And, somebody on the right might think if you cap the wage potential at $200,000, that would disincentivize people from really, going hard and trying to earn $1 million.
Right.
And, people might say that that's not good, that people don't have these empires, or like the example that you used,
Right.
a landlord who only is able to own one apartment building is going to put a lot of effort into that,
Right.
as opposed to buying other properties so that they can make more rent, make more money off of people paying rent. That this incentivizes growth. This leads to less growth, which of course is what the right tends to think of as improved economy is if more buildings are being built,
Okay.
if more apartment complexes are going up, that means the economy is booming.
Right, but of course that's so you're correct. Some people would make that argument, but it's a false argument because the reality is you would have the same number of apartment buildings, but with a larger number of landlords. They would be owned by more people. So like each building would have one owner, and with a very large building, it might be divided, where there are two different owners, one for the apartments on the east side and one for the apartments on the west side because the apartment building's too big or something. But no, you would just have more landlords responsible,
Well,
and each landlord would be responsible for a small enough amount of land that he or she could really take care of it, as opposed to being an absentee landlord. Go on, yeah.
Right, and if there are no billionaires, then it would have to be for the amount that it would cost to buy these huge, lofts, these huge apartment buildings. You would have to have many people. If the limit is $200,000, like you would need to have people, like if there are no billionaires to invest in a big property like this,
right.
you'd need more investors. Then you might be able to get away with. If you're Donald Trump.
But babe, again, sorry. So, people who raise this objection, it's always naive because billionaires don't gamble with their own money. All they do is co-sign a bank loan. So a billionaire, so let's say I wanted to open a Starbucks.
No,
Sorry, real example, real quick. If I were going to open a Starbucks, which I'm completely qualified to do, by the way, I go to a friend of mine who's a billionaire and ask him to invest the money. So I can open let's say it's a unique coffee. It's called a Vegan Bucks. Let's just take the other corporation out of it. I want to open a coffee shop, and I have a friend who's a billionaire. All he is going to do is go to the bank and sign a guarantee. In theory,
right.
He might put down $10,000 or something to indicate his seriousness in backing me. But most of the time, and then the bank provides me with the money, and I pay the money to the bank. So that's really what goes on. Amazingly, even with property investment, even when it's buying a house or what have you, the people who have billions of dollars, they don't dip into their non-liquid assets. They just act as guarantors for banks and other sources of investment. And within our lifetimes, the banks have been desperate for that type of investment to put into. So in some other parallel universe, some other period of history, that might not be true. But in this era of history, no, it's all really the money does basically flow from the banks. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So I have a couple different things I wanted to say just on the topic of landlords having this infinite source of income because of rent.
Yes.
I actually just was thinking about it. Universities also play into the system because if there's housing on, like I lived in student housing my first year at university. The amount that gets paid for your housing is also, kind of incredible, kind of astronomical. The second year, I decided to live in an apartment because it costs less money to share a 2-bedroom apartment off campus than to live on campus. And, it's not like these places are real nice. Like I was kind of living in a crummy dorm room, and so I just say universities also are kind of part of that they have this unlimited source of income every year because of the students that live on campus. They try to sell it as this experience, like, oh, you get to live on campus, you get to be, close to the libraries, close to your classes. And it's kind of BS too. Like there was like on campus housing, but it was like on a different.
Yeah.
You had to take a bus to get downtown to get to your classes every day. Like there was a different campus that housed, thousands of students. So yeah, it's you sell it as this experience that you're getting the college experience, you're living in a dorm, and
Right.
yeah. So
Well, and so look,
yeah.
I don't want to get too much into the unique politics of Eisel Mazard, because the more unique they are, the more relevant they are to my audience. But Melissa has heard me say this many times, that one of the ways in which governments become corrupt is just the assumption that it's their job to boost up property values higher and higher. And this includes having a university in the center of the city surrounded by glass towers. If you want to provide education to people on a cost-effective basis, Canada is full of ghost towns. We had one while I was there. It had just become a ghost town because like the only company had shut down. The company was a tree planting. It was like a government-led reforestry concern. It's like, okay, if you want to, you can take the whole medical science department from University of Toronto and move it into this ghost town, and everyone can live in a hut, or everyone can own their own house. At 1% of the price of living in downtown Toronto, right?
Absolutely.
You can reduce the cost of living and provide education at a lower price just by taking the universities, department by department, out of Paris, out of Berlin, out of Toronto, out of, New York City. That the enormous cost. This is without even getting socialist about.
But here's your mistake.
So I just say, if the government's agenda is actually to provide housing in a cost-effective way, that is going to include forms of urban planning that are directly contrary to the impulse of trying to at all times elevate and escalate property values so that government can collect more taxes on those properties. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna make a jab about it, because here's your mistake, that you think it's about providing cheap housing, or you think that it's really about education.
Right.
You think that university is really about education, when it's not. It's about having this college experience where what you see in those crappy Hollywood movies, it's your first year away from your parents, and you're gonna get drunk every weekend and get laid, and that's what they're selling. That's what they're selling, the college experience. So you're gonna go to football games every Saturday and be there for the team, and be in this cheering crowd.
Well, and let's admit the tragedy of it all.
If it were the case that you were just trying to improve medical education, I got to see this on the campus that you worked at in China. That campus was not designed for. It was a beautiful campus. It was nice, but it wasn't designed for sports teams. It was designed for learning. Yeah. The students were all on this campus. They lived on the campus, and they walked to the classes, came home, and their dorms were right there, right next to the classes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's efficient, and it's a way for you to learn.
All you need is a chalkboard, people.
Maybe they're living with 5 roommates at a time.
I've worked as a teacher in places where there was no electricity. I had a chalkboard and a candle. I've done that. Yeah. So I'm just saying, what you need is a chalkboard and shelter from the rain to provide education. But look, so babe, I'll wrap up this video now. But I mean, let's just note that, prisons and universities have in common that they define what people will do for the rest of their lives. I wish I could pretend that talk about prisons and universities was merely a convenient example, but it's tragic. I mean, it's real. And sorry, I mean, Melissa, if you even think about your own friends, we're not going to get into, examples, but most people, they have this one chance to study, and maybe they end up in debt for the rest of their lives, but they have this one chance to become something, to become someone. That's how we say this in English, right? You become a job. When I was a child, I think now this is illegal, school teachers still used to say to children, what, do you want to be a garbage man? If kids weren't studying, do you want to be a garbage? Because that's who you are, right? If that's the job you have, if that's the level of education you have, you are a garbage man, Today we'd say sanitation worker, but this sense of identity and purpose and place, there really is a profound economic function. There's a profound function in terms of preparing you to actually participate in democracy. There's a profound political function. There's a sense in which I would say both high schools and universities, and yes, also prisons, have this awesome significance in shaping what people do, at least for the next 10 years after they finish school, if not for the whole rest of their lives. So that's something the political establishment, the political elite, and the whole democratic infrastructure of society ought to be obsessed over. We ought to care passionately about it, and we ought to be innovating. We can't just look back at what Cambridge University used to be centuries ago, or we can't look back at what Harvard was, 100 years ago on a really deep level. That makes no sense. It's an incoherent answer, or it's an answer to the wrong question for what the future of these institutions will be, what the future of our society, our democracy will be. And look, sorry, it's the only other big issue we talked about here. I feel the same way about inequality. If we're talking about rich and poor and property ownership and paying rent, there's a fundamental question here that Aristotle already asked more than 2,000 years ago, and that we've been refusing to ask, I think, in the last 50 years. Any final thoughts, babe?
Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah, I'm sorry if I ranted too much about university.
No.
But the one thing that I wanted to talk about was just the role that getting rich has in America. And, I don't think that it is just unique to America, but in America, I just noticed as I was watching the Super Bowl, there was this quite touching commercial where someone who was a pro football player was in the commercial, and he was riding past the old field that he used to play on when he was a kid. And he said, I wish I could talk to that kid now and tell him that, one day you're going to make it. One day you're going to,
right.
basically be famous and earn a lot of money just for throwing around a ball. I mean, I'm sorry to simplify. I know a lot goes into it, a lot of training, a lot of thousands of hours of practice. But that is the way to get rich. That is the way to get notoriety in America. And to me, that's really sad. And it does typically, it does for me fundamentally get down to the meaning of life. Like, what are you going to do with your time on this earth, this limited time that you have here? I don't think that the answer is to just get rich. And I that's why, that's why, I like Bernie Sanders' campaign. It's for he's really for the working class.
Yeah.
And you like to think that, he's working for you. But, and I think he's probably doing what he can. This is what he's been saying the last 30 years. He's really been about this, helping the middle class just by pouring money into these different ideas of his: Medicare for all, free education, cancel student debt, all these things that are just, let's put money on the problem and it'll fix it.
Right.
But yeah, no, I agree with you. I think, it needs some fundamental reimagining the situation and how to solve that. Yeah.
I just say, I think that classism, so meaning here really the hatred for the poor, contempt for the poor, it's comforting to people in the same way that racism used to be. Still today, if you actually really think that people from other cultures and other races don't have intellectual potential, then you don't agonize about, you don't regret the fact that perhaps poverty, war, or even something as simple as an earthquake is preventing them from leading meaningful lives. And I think it's very, very hard for people, if they've grown up racist, to really recognize and face up to the fact, no, people who are born black or born Arab, they really do have as much intellectual potential as white people. And then it really is a tragedy when, for example, on the island of Haiti, that was poor to begin with, an earthquake makes life, really impossible for everyone for decades thereafter. Haiti was really wiped out by a very, very bad earthquake. And again, they were poor to begin with. So, but these people, they really do have the same intellectual potential if only they could go to a university and also have, protection from mosquitoes and, decent places to live.
Yeah.
So I just say it's a deeper tragedy. The one sense in which I'm a little bit bizarre is I have almost a reverse classism, because I've got to tell you, I think poor people have more intellectual potential than the rich. You know,
Yeah.
I think there's a real problem that people like Kim Kardashian grow up stupid because they're rich. I think there's a deadening of the instincts and a deadening of curiosity, and there's a great loss of intellectual potential because of what growing up wealthy means today. And now that probably wasn't true when Aristotle lived, just because rich people, they probably still had very hard lives. They were still fundamentally working on a farm and serving in the army.
Oh yeah, and the realities of
Right,
illness and
right.
you know,
But
death.
to me, the Kim Kardashian factor is real and it runs deep, and that makes this tragedy, this question of providing the poor with you know the means to lead a meaningful life and to develop themselves intellectually and to participate in democracy in a meaningful way, that makes it, you know, all the more important. Okay, babe, we're past our 30 minutes, so I'm going to stop there.
Okay, great.